to Andrew J. MacPhiles. Heed Destiny's call. You, sir, are the last living scion of Clan MacPhiles. Beast of Death has taken the 12th Earl. Now his soul is free. Let this be clear. No stone was left unturned to find you, for to you and yours alone go Castle MacPhiles, its lands, and all that it will bring. Look within you. The brave heart slays all doubt, and return at once to Scotland to win your legacy. That he who doubts these words be cursed unto eternity. Signed, Angus McNabb, Solicitor. The 13th Earl of MacPhiles. It has a nice ring to it. What do they call him, Mrs. Earl?
I don't know, Paula. I just want to get there before this storm hits. What I want to know is, what does "and all that it will bring" mean?
Money, of course. More money than you and I could ever dream of. We could get married and live happily ever after.
Out here? Look at this place. It's the end of the earth.
Maybe we're lost.
I've got a bad feeling about this. A really bad feeling. I quit my job and gave up a perfectly good rent control apartment. For what? I want to go home.
Wait, stop. There's someone in the road. Let's ask for directions.
It's some kind of serial killer hitchhiker, Paula. Lock your door.
He's not a hitchhiker. He's a sheep herder. Roll down your window.
Are you serious? A desperate man, a frightened sheep, a deserted road. Need I say more?
Oh, stop. Excuse me, sir. Can I ask you a question?
My fingers wet, my fingers dry. God strike me dead if I tell a lie.
I really don't like this.
We're looking for Castle MacPhiles. The last sign...
Which was somewhere back in civilization?
The last sign said it was this way.
The sign was right, lassie. It's just past the crook in the road, but I wouldn't go there if I were you. No one set foot in Castle MacPhiles and lived to tell about it. Certainly not in my lifetime.
That's it. We're out of here.
He was just joking, weren't you?
A man never jokes about ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties.
I've heard enough.
Oh, come on, Andrew. Don't be such a... I wonder where he went.
Who cares?
What are you doing?
Finding a turnaround. We'll head back to Glasgow, buy some plaid souvenirs, a bottle of scotch, and catch the next plane home.
Andrew, you're being a wimp again.
May I remind you, I come from a long line of wimps. Very happy old wimps.
Well, that's all going to change. When you take your rightful place as the 13th Earl of...
Did you see that?
Isn't it wonderful?
What? Paula, are you...
We're home! I just love the sound of bagpipes.
Good evening, Master MacPhiles.
Who are you?
We've been expecting you.
We? Who's we?
Permit me to introduce your staff, Mrs. Dimwitty, the cook.
The old lord, did you know? God rest his spirit and all the travelers that passed before him.
Travelers? Like us?
Dead souls all around us, whispering words of wisdom, words etched in stone.
And Fergus, the handyman.
I takes the bags and I cleans the floors. Just call on me to open the doors.
Nice to meet you, Fergus.
The pleasure's mine. You've travelled far. Give me the keys, I'll back the car.
I wouldn't...
I raced to Dundee, late for 300 miles. But see the mark of the MacPhiles.
Mark? What mark?
Pay no attention. Fergus had an unfortunate crash at Indianapolis. Head injuries, you know.
But I'd like to know what he's talking about.
And permit me to introduce myself. I'm Mirthley, your butler. Fergus will take your bags and put them in the tower room.
I'll pack the car first.
Please, my lord. Will you enter?
Paula, maybe we should talk about this a little more. We could check into a motel, go to a bar, have a few thousand drinks, pass out tomorrow. This will all be a bad dream.
It's time for playing. Are you coming or staying?
Little did the English know it, but John the Shoemaker was a champion golfer. He and the Prince of Wales beat those pitiful English duffers out of £114,000. The Prince gave all of this money to John as a present. John built himself a lovely house in Edinburgh and called it Golfer's Land. The motto carved into John's house says, "I hate no one." Isn't that bra? William Wallace's execution was disgusting. I don't even like talking about it. When they were done hanging and slicing him, they chopped him up like a sausage. Then they took all his parts and put them on display throughout Britain. Downright impolite, if you ask me. In the year 563, St. Columba took a little sightseeing trip on Loch Ness with some monks. Suddenly, the monster of the loch rose from the deep, dark lake like a water dragon. It gnashed its terrible teeth at the little boat full of Christians. It writhed and shrieked and spat and splashed. The monks screamed like frightened children. "Sit ye down, Saint Columba," they cried. "The water demon will bite your head off." But Saint Columba was not afraid. He wiped the water from his brow, took a deep breath and said, "Get ye gone." And wouldn't you know it, Nessie looked at him, shrugged, then disappeared under the rippling water. The ferry flag is still at Dunvegan Castle. I've seen it myself. The flag is made of fine silk, brown with age. There are intricate patterns stitched into the cloth which are called elf spots. Local legend says that the flag will be waved once more when the last MacLeod dies, and then the ferry flag will crumble and vanish forever. Kenneth MacAlpin had all the Pictish lords sit on benches that would disguise trap doors. The doors were held in place by retractable bolts. When the Picts were all seated, Kenneth had his minions pull the bolts, and all the Pictish lords fell into the pits where they were hacked to pieces. This banquet came to be known as the treachery of Scone. Afterwards, there was no one left to put up a fight. MacAlpin became king of all Scotland. Captain Hugh MacPhiles loved Eyemouth. It was a pirate's paradise. The town was built like a maze with teeny tiny little side streets and dead ends. You could hide almost anything from the British troops. The houses had hidden chambers which smugglers crammed full of illegal goods. Underground passageways led to escape routes. The cliffs nearby the town were full of secret caves. What's shrivelled and brown and buried under Melrose Abbey? The heart of Robert the Bruce, of course. The Bruce was a famous Scottish king who defeated the English. After he died, a knight named Sir Douglas cut out the Bruce's heart. Sir Douglas set off on a quest to bury it in Jerusalem, in the Holy Land. Unfortunately, he was killed while fighting the Moors in Spain. Another knight picked up the Bruce's heart and brought it back to Scotland. He put it in a casket and buried it under Melrose Abbey. It's still there, or so they say, rotting under the crumbling walls. What was that? Before Chastelard was beheaded, he recited a poem for his beloved Mary. Then he cried out plaintively, "Adieu, thou most beautiful and most cruel princess in the world." Before the executioner swung his axe, he complimented Chastelard on his fine poem. Chastelard shrugged with modesty and said, "If I'd had more time, I could have written an entire..." A house party was held at Glamis Castle while the Earl and his wife were away. The guests decided to find out for sure if the story about the monster was true or not. They hung a towel out of every window they could find, then gathered on the lawn below. Sure enough, there was one window with no towel. Before they could figure out how to get to it, the Earl returned, and the secret was preserved. Soon after Captain Kidd was put to death, some of the treasure that he stole was found on Long Island in America. Legend says that some of his loot is still buried somewhere on an island off the coast of New York State. The cave was full of human remains, skulls, their brains and eyes long since eaten lay on the floor like prizes in a headhunter's lair. Arms and legs hung from the ceiling. The walls were splattered with gore. Yuck! It was a bad place. The ghoulish family was taken to Edinburgh where they were put to death. For the last meal, they asked for raw tourist. They didn't get it. It was night when bonny Prince Charlie said farewell to Flora. They were in the village of Portree, at an inn. Charlie had changed from his spinning maid's clothes to the garb of a Scotsman. Tartan coat, philibeg, bonnet and dirk. He gave Flora a tiny portrait of himself. Before he walked out of the door, he said, "I hope to see you at my father's court in London when he is made king." Charlie left that night and never set foot on Scottish soil again. Soon after, Flora was caught by the British and put in the Tower of London. After staying in jail for several months, she was pardoned and released. This amazing woman went on to have many more adventures. Suddenly, the corpse lets out a blood-curdling shriek. Then she jumps out of the coffin and runs into the house screaming bloody murder. The grave robber's heart almost bursts from fright as he flees through the woods and into the night. Can you figure out what happened? Well, you see, the minister's wife wasn't really dead after all. She had caught this rare disease that makes it look like you're dead when you're really just in a deep, deep sleep. Thanks to the grave robber, she was saved from being buried alive. She went on to have 2 sons who founded their own religion. Now, how about that? Just so you know, the name of this castle means lark's nest in Scots Gaelic. Here's another interesting fact. When an army attacked a castle, it was called a siege. This is a foreign word, which means to set or blockade. To breach a castle's high walls, engineers created siege towers, also called belfries. These wooden structures, some over 100 feet high, were rolled up to a castle's walls. Archers stood in the top stories and rained deadly fire down into the castle. The bottom of the belfry housed a battering ram with a pointed head. This heavy ram was used to smash the castle gates. Some siege towers had drawbridges which were lowered to the castle walks so that an attack party could storm the walls. Here's what it says on Rob Roy's grave. A famous man is Robin Hood, the English ballad singer's joy. And Scotland has a thief as good, an outlaw of his daring mood. She has her brave Rob Roy. The king unsheaths his dirk. The murderous blade gleams in the light. Without warning, James stabs the Earl of Douglas once, twice, thrice. Then he drags the Earl's body down the hole and hurls him out the window. The poor Earl lands in the garden with a dull thud, like a squashed haggis. 345 years later, some gardeners find the skeleton in the garden. They think they are the remains of the Earl of Douglas. And what about that killing king? He was blown to smithereens by a cannon which exploded during a siege. All they found was the tip of his treacherous nose. John Paul Jones went to sea when he was but a wee lad of 12 years. Even though the life of a sailor was dangerous and brutal, going to sea was one of the best ways for a poor young man to seek his fortune. If a British ship captured an enemy vessel, the crew was awarded prize money. And even a commoner, a gardener's son like John Paul, could rise in rank and one day hoist his flag. That means you're an admiral of the fleet. Somehow, Donald MacLean got free of his makeshift prison. He decided to teach those Spaniards a lesson. He went to the place where they stored the gunpowder, started the fire and blew up the ship. The galleon sunk to the bottom of the harbour like a great rock. Legend says that the galleon was full of bullion, but only a few gold coins have been found at the bottom of the harbour. Unfortunately for Macbeth, the witches tricked him. Here's what happened. A chief named Malcolm gets the idea of dressing his soldiers up with twigs and branches from, of all places, Birnam Wood. Then Malcolm's camouflaged army sneaks up on Dunsinane Castle in their three disguises. They kill Macbeth and slaughter his army. So in the end, Birnam Wood did march on Dunsinane. Never trust a tricky witch. It was believed that some bards were full of mystical powers. These magical poets could inspire a warrior to victory, make an enemy ill, or shame a coward to death. One famous bard got even with a king who insulted him. He sang a song which mocked the ruler so cruelly that the king broke out in great, nasty, hideous, oozing boils. The moral is, never tease a bard. Whatever you do, don't let her see her face. If she does, she'll put the death shirt on you. And what then? Well, you'll be dead, you daft gowk. The Banshee is a hideous-looking hag. A bloodless, boneless wraith with sunken eyes, white hair, and a ragged sheet wrapped around her like an ancient death shroud. Phew! Sort of sounds like me dear old mum. The Bodach is a scary old demon who sneaks down the chimney and steals naughty children. I don't even like thinking about him. It gives me the willies. There is a story about a forester who was forced by the Duke of Argyll to shoot a female deer which had been following the Duke's army. Before he shot the fateful arrow, the forester said, "It will be the last shot I ever fire." The instant the arrow struck the deer, the forester fell dead. The deer changed back into the shape of a beautiful woman. The forester's secret love. Well, it's a sad story then, isn't it? Sometimes elves kill cattle with their nasty little elf shots. If you look hard enough, you can find them on the ground. But watch out, they're poisonous. Long, long ago, there was a great, hideous monster named Balor. This wicked creature could kill a man with the slightest glance from his evil eye. If he even so much as squinted at you, you'd melt like ice cream in a furnace. Here's some interesting fairy facts. If you want to attract a fairy, wear the colour green. They love green. But if you want to keep a fairy away, wear a charm made of iron. They hate iron. If you keep a nail in your pocket at night, the fairies can't take you away while you're sleeping. It was believed that saying this charm could make you invisible. Very handy for hiding from ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. You pronounce it like this. Fee-fa. In the Highlands of Scotland, it was believed that no sister should comb her hair at night if she had a brother at sea. This would surely cause him to be drowned. So to all you lassies with brothers at sea, put down those combs. Here's how you catch a kelpie. You sneak up to him when he's munching on some grass, then you throw a bridle over his head. The bridle has to have the sign of the cross on it, or it won't work. Then you jump on that demon horse and ride him till he's knackered. Good luck. On this day, the souls of long-dead ancestors return to their family homes. Ghosts, demons, and fairies haunt the land. Banshees shriek and ghosts howl. Villagers go to the hilltops and burn great bonfires. They dance and sing and play music to scare the evil spirits away. The MacPhiles don't like the main. They hide in the closet till it's over, making goosebumps and cringe. There was a renowned MacPhile seer named Derek the Diviner. When he was but a wee lad, Derek had a vision that he would stub his toe cruelly on a standing stone. 20 years later, Derek and his wife went to visit Stonehenge. And wouldn't you know it, Derek tripped over his shoelaces and stubbed his toe on one of those great rocks. Amazing! When a Selkie turns into a human woman, she has to hide her seal skin. If a man finds the skin, the Selkie must marry him. If she ever discovers where her husband keeps the skin, however, she will leave her children and husband and turn back into a seal. You see, she can't resist the call of the ocean. It calls to her like like a great calling thing. Several hours' drive from the village of Sleetbane, Sleetshire, is an interesting example of early Scottish domestic architecture. The Castle MacPhiles. This is the hereditary seat of the most consistently cowardly clan in Scotland, the MacPhiles. Castle MacPhiles is without a doubt the worst example of strategic positioning in all of Scotland. It is open on all sides to attack. The walls are thin and would not withstand a siege. There is no moat. Magnus Og the Cold-footed MacPhiles, the original builder of the castle, had begun to dig a moat, but his great fear of drowning caused him to fill it in. Fortunately, no English army ever even thought to attack the MacPhiles' stronghold, either out of disdain or pity. The recorded history of Castle MacPhiles begins in Edward the Confessor's time, but there are glimpses of its existence long before that. The name of MacPhiles first occurs in a 10th century Celtic manuscript in which Urk the Beardless Bard, a famous seer, cursed a man named Malcolm MacPhiles. Apparently, Malcolm fled from a band of marauding Norsemen who subsequently burned and pillaged Urk the Beardless Bard's home. The angry seer made a prophecy. Malcolm MacPhiles will run for 5 days and 5 nights until his cowardly hams give out from under him and his wee heart bursts asunder. And the cursed ground upon which it drops is where he and his kin will live out their skulking lives. The recorded history of Castle MacPhiles Up the main stairs and across the hall is the tartan room. This chamber is the pride of Castle MacPhiles. Displayed for the viewer's satisfaction and pleasure are numerous kilts. There is an interesting story behind these fine filibegs. Sir Thomas MacPhiles was an eccentric golfer. Whenever he played a round with someone, He wagered the MacPhiles tartan against his opponent's clan colours. Sir Thomas literally beat the skirts off the poor duffers. These proud plaids now hang from the walls of the tartan room like the skins of exotic beasts. Please, absolutely no tartan touching. Play the links with sheep droppings the way the ancient shepherds did. £2 sixpence per round, open Tuesday through Saturday. Every 5 years, the village of Sleepbane turns out for the annual Festival of Haggis held at Castle MacPhiles, inclement weather notwithstanding. Haggis are released into the wild, and the townsfolk take turns chasing them across the moors, shouting, "My heart's in the Highlands a chasing the haggis." It is a lovely sight, and not one to be missed. Displaying the great hall of the castle is the Lost Bear. This giant grizzly escaped from a travelling circus. It terrorised the countryside before Buffalo MacPhiles, the small game hunter, tracked it down. Instead of shooting the beast, Buffalo turned and ran. The bear gave chase, stumbled onto the motorway, and was struck dead by a Glenfiddich lorry. Several famous Scottish dances were invented in this room, including the Highland Shuffle, the Sheep Dip, and the Safety Dance. The Coward's Fling was inspired by the capers of Malcolm MacPhiles. The dance's upraised arms mimic Malcolm fleeing in terror from an enemy after having thrown down his sword. Just so you know, the Coward's Fling is not a popular dance at Castle MacPhiles, nor is it acknowledged by the clan. The chapel was built by Alan the Meek MacPhiles in 1542, and thanks to God for protecting him as he fled from the Battle of Solway Moss, where James V and his army of Scotsmen were slaughtered by the English. The chapel is one of the most beautiful examples of stained glass art in the area. Depicted in the scene is the legendary event of St. George slaying the dragon. Several people over the years claim to have heard an angel singing in the chapel. The angel's voice has been described as sweet and haunting. Another legend tells that the heart of Robert the Bruce's second cousin, twice removed, is buried under the chapel in a nice leather pouch with tassels. Although the castle has played no significant part in history whatsoever, it has had its share of interesting visitors. The Scottish bard Robert Burns spent a night here on his travels and was inspired to write one of his lesser-known works, Here is a Wretched Place to Die. Mary Queen of Scots, the doomed beauty, reluctantly stayed here for a weekend whilst on the run from Scottish rebels. There is a reference to the castle in Mary's famous casket letters in which she writes, "My room had a musty smell, like cheese trapped in a sock." While Sir Walter Scott never actually visited the castle, he knew of it by reputation. He used the castle as a setting for his novel, The Lay of the Lily-Livered Shy Cock. The Roman historian Tacitus described how his father-in-law, Agricola, defeated an army of red-haired men at the Battle of Mons Grappus. Tacitus wrote disdainfully about one particular red-haired man. After the battle, the Roman soldiers went in search of men who had fled the field. They found one in a barn, hiding under a sheepskin, bleating like an idiot. He called himself MacPhiles. He was brought before Agricola in his animal costume, and so amused my father-in-law with his sheep's antics that Agricola spared his life. King Arthur vanquished the Scots at the Battle of Loch Lomond. The Scots begged for mercy. One particular Scot, William the Waning MacPhiles, cried like a little lost child. Arthur was so saddened by William's anguish that he began to weep himself. He felt such pity for the Scots that he let him go free. William Wallace crushed the English in a stunning victory. Unfortunately, all the MacPhiles took a wrong turn on their way to the battle. They got stuck in a marsh where they misplaced several nice dirks, scratched their shins in the brambles, and made a mess of their filipigs. William Wallace was routed by the English in a stunning defeat. Fortunately, all the MacPhiles were still stuck in the marsh. Robert the Bruce vanquished Edward II. Gordon the Gout MacPhiles made a fool of himself by accidentally retreating with the English army. David II, son of Robert the Bruce, was beaten and taken at the Battle of Neville's Cross. Kyle the Bleater MacPhiles eluded capture by dressing up as a sheep. Unlike his ancestor, who was caught in sheep's garb by the Romans, Kyle had been practicing to be a sheep since childhood and was quite good at it. James IV and his army were slaughtered by a superior force of Englishmen. Angus the Hairy MacPhiles attempted to escape the English by dressing up as a sheep. Unfortunately, he had so perfected the family art of sheep acting that the English soldiers truly believed he was mutton. They killed, roasted, and ate him for dinner. James V was trounced by Henry VIII's army. James died of a nervous breakdown a few days later. Alan the Meek MacPhiles eluded capture by retreating the day before the battle even started. Bonnie Prince Charlie's army was smashed by the English. Charlie fled into exile with a £30,000 price on his head. Ian the Cringer MacPhiles fled into exile right behind Bonnie Prince Charlie, but Charlie kept shooing him away. The Allied army of British, Dutch, Belgian and German units met the Emperor Napoleon and his French legions at the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium. Stuart Wendy MacPhiles, bagpiper with the 93rd Sutherland Highlanders, was so terrified at the sight of the attacking French troops that he bit the mouthpiece off his bagpipe and swallowed it whole. It lodged in his throat like a stale bannock and would have choked him to death had not a kindly Frenchman stomped on his sternum. The force of the blow popped the mouthpiece out of Stuart's gullet and sent it into the air like a champagne cork. Antelope MacPhiles, son of the small game hunter Buffalo MacPhiles, spent a year in France with the 8th Black Watch. His battalion was stationed at the Somme in France. After a terrible bombardment, Antelope went crazy with shell shock and had to be sent to a mental institution. Army medical records state, Sergeant MacPhiles is convinced that he is a farmyard animal, quite possibly a goat or a sheep. He is terrified that the hospital staff is going to shear his fine woolly coat. He refuses to take any nourishment other than grass, which causes him to be sick all over his cell. After the war was over, Antelope recovered from his madness. He moved to Finland, where he opened a ladies' hat shop. Antelope's hat shop unfortunately did not succeed. He moved back to Scotland just in time to make the next war. Antelope was drafted into the army, where he spent the next 6 years trying his best not to be killed. Sir Walter Scott started out his career as a barrister. His law partner, Dickie Burman MacPhiles, teased Scott that he would never make it as a lawyer because he was neither sneaky nor dull enough for the job. He suggested that Scott write one of those silly little stories about knights you're always talking about. John Poe, A cabin boy on a ship in the West Indies was captured by the pirate Captain Hugh MacPhiles. The grizzled MacPhiles took a liking to the young Scot and taught him the ropes, as they say. Captain Hugh told John Paul that if he ever wanted to be famous, he'd need a flashier name. John Paul suggested John Paul the Grim-Beard. Captain Hugh, in a moment of brilliant inspiration, replied, "How about John Paul Jones?" Thus was born a legend. Selkirk was on a voyage in the Pacific when he got into an argument with his captain, Hamish MacPhiles. Selkirk made cruel remarks about the captain's ancestry and did a mocking rendition of the coward's fling on the poop deck. Hamish MacPhiles, in a fit of rage, marooned Selkirk on a desolate island. Stevenson started out his career as an engineer. After almost being crushed to death by a shoddily designed bridge devised by one Waldo MacPhiles, Stevenson decided to try his hand at writing. These amazing inventions were actually developed by Stuart the Clever MacPhiles in his laboratory at Castle MacPhiles. Stuart accidentally used his designs as gift wrap for a birthday present he sent to his old boarding school chum, Alexander the Weasel Bell. Bell swiped them faster than you can say dirty filcher. In 1868, John Muir went on a safari with Buffalo MacPhiles. The small game hunter's disrespect for nature so angered Muir that he decided to become a naturalist.